And I want to welcome everybody to the Reentry Housing panel. Just to give you a little insight about who I am and what I do, I am presently employed at Summit Academy, where I've been working for approximately 7 years now, teaching 18-year-olds and up how to build homes. So you can see why this issue is very meaningful to me. I'm also a coordinator with Power of People, a program started by Dr. Werner and Shane Price. Here in my panel, I'm going to let them introduce themselves, and I'm going to start first with Eliza.
Hello, everybody. My name is Eliza Darris. I certainly thank you for coming out on this traffic clogged day. It was, especially for those of us who were coming from St. Paul, right here to the north side. I know that it was a difficult, perilous journey, and so we definitely appreciate you for coming out. Again, my name is Eli Darris. I'm the Smart Justice Organizer with the ACLU. I'm also involved in politics locally. I've worked in field operations for some campaigns. I'm currently Anika Bowie's Deputy Campaign Manager. I'm a community organizer, activist. I am someone who looks at himself as being thoroughly involved and thoroughly interested in all facets of our community. There's not one part of our community that doesn't interest me and that I don't want to be involved in. I'm also a returning citizen. I was 15 years old when I was arrested, convicted, and given life, fought to get that reversed on appeal. I've been out for about 2.5 years, and I've been very fortunate to be blessed and welcomed by my community, and I feel indebted to put in work for the community.
Thank you, brother.
Hello, my name is Erica Coleman. I am a real estate broker. Been in the real estate industry. It's too close. It's too close. Been in the industry 21 years. I also work for the City of Minneapolis in housing policy and development through CPED, which is Community Plan Economic Development, the development arm of the city. I work in 1 to 4 residential housing where we focus on home ownership. And I also was impacted by incarceration and reentry and housing instability as a child due to my parents' incarceration.
Thank you, sister.
Good evening. My name is Earl Conley, and I am here representing Midwest Challenge Life Rebuilders, which is a transitional program in South Minneapolis. I'm also a community pastor here in Minneapolis, and I also work for the Department of Employment and Economic Development as an employment specialist. So I've been doing this work with people and their children in the community for about 25 years. So I'm glad to be here tonight.
Thank you, brother.
Hello, everyone. My name is Danielle Swift. I am a housing advocate. I have some background in a financial institution for years, sold real estate as a salesperson for a few years, and working towards becoming a broker, like Erica.
Nice, very nice.
Yes. And I've shifted my focus more so on sales to meeting particularly Black community where we are at. And a lot of that has to do with just tenants' rights and organizing. So I work at the Frogtown Neighborhood Association as an anti-displacement organizer, currently running for city council in St. Paul on an economic development platform. And trying to wrap my head around zoning and development and what it really looks like to build communities and having people have access to those buildings.
Thank you, sister.
Yes.
Thank you.
Hello, everybody. My name is Richard McLemore. I represent McLemore Holdings. I'm the former employee of Ujamaa Place, and what McLemore Place Holdings will do is the same thing I was doing at Ujamaa Place. I was structured education around housing. We'll talk more about it, and I don't want to dive too deep into it. But I also started the community diversion program with JDC, which is a partnership with JDI initiative there in St. Paul for the folks across the river. I'm a property owner. I'm a landlord. I'm a concerned citizen. I'm a returning citizen. I'm totally bought in, and I feel like there's a gap, and it has to do with education, and that's what I want to talk about today.
Thank you, brother.
All right, thank you. So the way this is gonna go is we're gonna have a panel discussion for around 35 minutes, and then we're gonna open it up for Q&A and solutions for the next 30 minutes, all right? So my first question is to the panel. What are some of the general misconceptions and stereotypes regarding people looking for housing? Anybody, whoever wants to take it first.
Some of the stereotypes and general.
Misconceptions, yes, regarding people looking for housing. Yes, this is reentry housing, yes. There was
I have a
factors.
response to that.
Yeah.
I think some of the common misconceptions is that you can come up with a foolproof plan by putting opinionated barriers in place.
Right.
There really are no true barriers to housing. Most of them are the ones we create. I mean, we're the ones who say you can't get in because you have a criminal background. We're the ones who say you can't get in because you have a low credit score. I mean, this is all man-made stuff. So I think the barrier is us.
Right. So, one of the primary barriers is, when they put on the application that you can't have a criminal background, and with the perception being that somehow somebody with an impacted background or a felony in their background will somehow be less than responsible when they move into the rented space, when most landlords who actually do rent to people who do have impacted backgrounds actually find out that these are some of their most stable renters because of how difficult it is for those individuals to get housing in the first place. So that's one of the misperceptions, is that, by putting that barrier there, they're somehow protecting themselves when, in essence, they're not.
I think one of the major misconceptions is that supplying housing to somebody with an impacted background is violent and dangerous. You'll hear a lot of landlords say that they have to protect others. That's just this huge misconception, as if people or human beings are animals, so to speak, where you're thinking like they're gonna be dangerous or they're gonna be violent towards other people or other individuals because of a background that you have no history about, that you don't even know what happened to them or anything. So that's a huge misconception, is that, like you said, they're less than, that you're considering people to be less than human beings.
I think one of the biggest issues right now is availability. With the increase in the amount of rents that can be charged for a unit, most of the I'd say probably 75, 80% of the people that I work with are renting a room, which it affords them a roof over their head that night or that month, but it doesn't allow them to transition, not correctly, because they're going from a halfway house to a pseudo halfway house. So I'd have to say availability of viable housing stock where an individual can rent a livable space and feel good about where they live and the opportunity it presents for them. I don't think that's available readily for most.
So is there a shortage in available housing, or is there just a willingness to rent.
I think that there's a little bit of both. One of the biggest misconceptions that I have seen is that you don't have because you don't want it, or you don't have because you don't get up and go and grind for it. And that's not necessarily true, because we know some of the most hardest working people are people who are put in predicaments where they're denied access. So there is an actual shortage. We are in a time where the vacancy rate is extremely low. And so there's just not enough housing that is needed for the number of people who are looking for it, for one. So that's like a huge misconception, where it's like, well, you don't have it just because you don't have X, Y, and Z. You can have all of that, but just having something like a criminal background really puts a barrier for you to be able to access housing, as it's limited already. So I think it's both with that, where we have a shortage and a really high demand, and then paired with the barriers like screening criteria really makes it very difficult for returning citizens to have access to housing.
So I can't go on without calling it out. One of the biggest barriers and misconceptions that we have to address and call out is that we have Black men that are returning citizens, that you already are returning to a system that is racist. So the housing system itself here in Minnesota, it's a racist system. And so then when you couple that with the majority of landlords and what race they would be and how they view people, you have Black men that are not able to find housing, that are not able to find decent housing, that are not able to afford the housing, that are not able to be with their families. We have to call that out and say, okay, that's one of the biggest barriers, which forms a lot of the misconceptions, and why there is a quote unquote housing shortage is one, the cost, two, depending on where you're looking to live, the restrictions that the municipality may have in place to stop you from being able to live in the area of your choosing.
You know, and you know, it's an uncomfortable subject to talk about, but you know, I work with sex offenders that are being released from incarceration, and you know, and I'm not in any way wanting you to judge what they did, but they are the least likely of all of these released ex-offenders to ever gain housing. And I'm talking a room, you know, and then when they lose, I had a young man riding public transportation 5 nights in a row because he had nowhere to go. And I think that is an indictment against this entire process, that a person leaves incarceration and goes out and for whatever reason loses the housing opportunity, and there's nothing that he can look forward to in regards to saying, this is my next step in the process. So there are a lot of discrepancies when we're talking about housing for people who, and we keep using this term, and I have my own opinions of it, re-entry. You know, that implies that they were a part of a process that they subtracted themselves from and are coming back to it. This is total entry. Okay? We have to be honest. We have to be honest if we're gonna have a dialogue. This is not re-entry, this is entry for a lot of these individuals. They were not a part of the greater society in the beginning. And so when they look at this thing, and I talk to individuals about housing and employment opportunities, and they are very pessimistic. Many of them are coming out again after being sent back, and now they're coming out again, and they have this, you know, this cycle that they're trying to break, and they don't have support, they don't have the tools, and it's just a revolving door for them, and they are very dismayed by this. So I think that's one of the issues.
All right. Okay, so let's stay there. I'm living in the community. Why should I be supportive or accepting of someone who has a background, who's trying to find housing? Why should I even care? I mean, should I be scared? You know, shaking? No. I mean, what? Why should it matter?
Can I? Okay, so this is how I think, okay? If an individual is in my community, I wanna know where he's at. I mean, if he's got an address, if he has an address that he goes to and he lives there, then I know where he's at. And I can rest a little easier. That's one of the reasons why I help people who have convictions find jobs. Maybe he won't rob me. It's a selfish reason, but it's my reason. Okay? And I'm being real. I've been robbed before, and it ain't nice. So if he's in my neighborhood, and I know he lives at 227 whatever street, who told you where I live? Apartment 6.
I have a thought on that. I think, well, we're talking about housing, and housing is a basic human need. It's not a commodity, it's not a luxury, it's something that we know that people need in order to survive. And so even if you have a background, you still need housing. You're still a human being. And to say anything other than that is saying that you are less than human. Right? And so, and when we're talking specifically about re-entry or entry, we know that we're talking more so to the Black man because he's incarcerated at a faster rate than his peers.
So can I chime in on something though about, I'm sorry, go ahead.
So your question kind of, gave me a pause because initially when you asked the question, you asked, you said, let's stay there. You were like, well, why would I want to know? Or first of all, my thought process is, why is it your business? If somebody, I mean, I'm just being real here. I understand with sex offenders having to register, but otherwise, why is it your business? Are they in that property? Are they, disturbing you? Is it, are they trashing anything? Why is it your business? If people are entering into the community, now if you want to come at them and be like, hi neighbor, welcome to the community, fine. But getting to know somebody's background, that's not your business. Not to mention, technically, and I'm gonna go off of the book, we all criminals. Everybody just ain't been caught. Just saying. There's certain things, there's lies, different things, we all criminals, everybody just ain't been caught. So is that everybody else's business to try and open it up and say, well, you don't deserve to live next to me because you have this in your background and I need to know that to determine whether I want you in this community or not. And when you say that, like Danielle said, what I instantly pictured was Black men and white women telling them where they couldn't be.
Wow. Okay. That book, by the way,
Yeah.
is We Are Criminals.
Yes.
And what she's referring to is that 1 in 4 people have a criminal record, but 4 in 4 people have a criminal background.
Right.
And no one's innocent in this thing.
Exactly.
Right? Some people just don't have the 30 seconds, the worst 30 seconds. You know what I mean? So I think about the human need, the necessity of housing, and the public safety aspect, the money aspect. But this is multi-layered. There's all type of stuff going on with this housing thing, and there's all type of different opinions and motivations for people having access and not having access. It can go all the way back to the courts if you really think about it, and their lack of interest in it. I forgot who I was talking to. I think we were talking over there about just if you want an education around housing, just go to housing court just one day. Just go to the courthouse. It's public. It's your right, and just sit there and see what cases are presented time and time and time and time again. They only see one type of case in housing court. It's UD hearings. That's it. They are totally reactive in housing court, and they know it. They pay judges 6 figures to respond to these problems. So you can go all the way up with this, and you can go all the way down. But eventually the conversation has to be had. It has to be had by all parties involved. You know, everyone has a motivation to do what they do. I mean, even as a returning citizen and now a property owner and a landlord, I unfortunately, hell yeah, I do want to know. I may not discriminate. I might. I'm a human being. Let's be honest. Let's be honest. If one of Earl's folks comes and holler at me, I may feel some type of way. I am a human being. I may have to get over that. I may not. So this is a really tough conversation because I'm impacted by this, but now as a landlord, hey, this is a business too. So let's be real here.
So how do we get over that? I mean, why is it in our best interest to want people stable?
I think that, you know, the fact of the matter is, 90% of individuals will be getting out of the facilities. That's just a fact. It's not a question of, you know, if individuals will be coming back into the community, whether it's entering or re-entering or whatever you would want to call it, they're coming back, and it's literally nothing lawfully that could happen to prevent people who were incarcerated from coming back into the community. And you wouldn't be able to look at someone and somehow see a magical glow around them that says ex-offender, ex-inmate, ex-whatever you want to call it. You just wouldn't be able to look at someone and tell. So it could be your neighbor right now. It could be your landlord right now. Literally, it could be anybody right now, and you would have no clue. And so it's in all of our best interest to make sure that the re-entry of someone is as seamless as we can possibly make it. And that our communities are as healthy as we can possibly make it. Whereas if that's not happening, we're going to be the ones that are going to pay the consequence. Like if someone is finding themselves locked out, locked in, prevented, and boxed all around from being able to, you know, participate in some of the most basic functions of society, then I can imagine a certain level of desperation taking root. In my particular case, I've been very, very fortunate. I have potentially seen, you know, the thin edge of losing, you know, my housing, you know, but I have a really strong community around me and I have really strong foundations. Other people don't have that. And so everyone is going to be getting out for the most part. 90-something% of people are going to be getting out. And the only question is, what type of community are we going to have those individuals that are getting out coming back into? You know, are we going to be embracing people and allowing people to realize that the same second chances that we all have gotten, all of us have committed criminal offenses, but not all of us have been caught. And some of us have been picked up in some of the outskirts, some of those suburban cities, for crimes that we committed, and a police officer took us home, and you didn't get a criminal record, right? But all of us have done it. And so the only question is, do we extend the very same second chance that came to us, that allowed for us, you know, and afforded us to be able to live a certain kind of life to other individuals? But again, you know, the primary thing is everyone is getting out, and, you know, what are we gonna, you know, have waiting for them once they come out of those facilities?
It matters because it doesn't just impact that individual that is entering or re-entering, and it doesn't just impact you as a neighbor, it impacts their families, their children, and it goes on for generations. And if you don't care, if somebody can't show kindness or humanity to care, then it's a much larger ripple effect. We're seeing it right now within our communities throughout Minnesota. We're seeing the effects of it. This is 2019. We got a lot of people getting out of prison around this time. And we have a lot of adults that were impacted as children because of incarceration of their parents, siblings, loved ones. And it matters more beyond just housing. It matters for education. It matters for job stability. It matters way beyond that. And so we have to look at it from a holistic approach instead of just housing. Housing is one piece, one symptom that could completely tear the fabric, but there's many other things compounded in that why we should care.
So I'm struggling with some things and maybe the panel can help me out. Last week, I was at a function where around 30 black men, and I was being thanked prematurely for participating in this up and coming forum. They said that around half of them were staying with their girlfriend, right? Now, typically, I know as a society, we frown on that, but I was sitting there looking, and I knew about half of them, and I was thinking, how dangerous would it be if they didn't have their girlfriend support them, if they were homeless on the streets? So, I just have to put that out there. When we're talking about housing, we're talking about public safety. I have a friend who's in the audience. I'm not going to say his name, but he was living in an apartment complex off of Glenwood and Thomas, over north. Housing apartment complex for 3 years. He and 6 other families. What they had in common is that all 7 felonies had someone who had a felony background. But the owner of the building believed in a second chance. So they were allowed to be there for years, raising their families. And from what I understand, they were always on time paying their rent and never had any issues. Well, the owner sold the building. And the people who bought the building gave them 30 days to move out because they noticed that they had felonies. So we're talking about how people can get into housing, but what happens if they're already there, but pushed out? What can we do about that to prevent that?
I think that's where policy comes in, and pulling in your elected officials and paying attention what's happening in your local government really makes a difference. To say you can't do that, and that's a lot of what we see now, and it's not just with criminal backgrounds, but a lot of the time it's just coming down to being priced out. So especially with big apartment buildings, you see a big apartment building for sale, the market is hot, values go up a little bit, maybe they put in a new little laminate or something real basic, and all of a sudden you're paying $150 or $200 more for rent, and you can't afford it. Now this is currently where we're at, and this is where displacement comes from, And I like to use the word displacement rather than gentrification, because gentrification is kind of this new word where people make up their own definitions about what it actually means as a point of argument, which really what we're saying is that when development comes and values rise, who is being displaced and who is able to benefit from those investments. And time again, you'll see it's communities of color and it's lower income communities who are getting the hit every single time.
So this is the intersection of property rights and policy. Policy can be put in place, such as renters protections, where it would be that, considering at the state level, being a ex-convicted felon is not like a protected class. It would be that the renter protection at the municipal level would have to say, if this building is sold, you have to, one, notify tenants with so many days beforehand, and then work something out where tenants have a 90 to 120 day period after it's sold to be able to move. They still probably would be displaced, but it would be giving them more of a warning. Because I know the city of Minneapolis is working on renter protections right now to notify tenants before a property is being sold, which has nothing to do with their criminal background. But what about a piece after the property is sold? Of working that out where, okay, you've been notified the property is sold, you're crossing your fingers that you get to stay with the new owners, right, which can tell you anything when they come to look at the building and whatnot. But then as soon as they have the deed in hand, they're like, no, you gotta go, 30 days. Maybe a policy in place that stops that process from being so quick, and that it can be extended a little bit longer. but you're still impeding upon property rights. So you can't make an owner rent to somebody.
I think what has to, I used to own a lot of real estate, and, I rented to people who had convictions all the time. I gave them expectation. I would tell them my policies. Okay, if you violate them, we gotta deal with that. I think the problem is being approached too often from a political standpoint. And this creates an us versus them mentality. You have to get buy-in from parties that are involved, that are being affected, the stakeholders, the tenants, people with convictions, property owners. When you can create a dialogue between people and they see that they're all people, then I'm willing to extend myself beyond my normal standard to create a new environment. What we're not doing is we're not doing that. And too often we don't rent to felons. And I have employers who say we don't hire felons. And I tell people that I work with that are going out there looking for jobs, this is your comeback. Well, good, because I'm not a felon anymore. I was a felon when I committed my crime. I was a felon when I went to court and I got prosecuted. When I went to prison, I was classified as a felon. Now I'm out here in the community, rebuilding my life, and I'm what's really known as an ex-offender. And so we have to create conversation because, let's be honest, housing is about money, first and foremost. I'm trying to reach profitability. That's all I'm trying to do. I own a property. I want it to perform to its maximum.
My American dream too.
Now, how do we do that? We have to have dialogues with those that have these properties and those that desire to rent these properties. There has to be a dialogue where people are coming together and talking about how can we work together. Maybe the standard lease agreement that's in place now gets modified, where there's a probationary period for people who have a conviction. You supply the information. If you're on supervision, you give them the name of your parole officer. You let them know exactly where you work, whatever information, and it creates new conversation. This is not going to work in its current state, and I don't care how many darts we throw at it.
You have to have conversation. However, I'm not gonna come off of housing being a basic human right. And so housing being a moneymaker, I get it. That's how I made my living, right? I totally get it. But I still value people and human beings more than making that money. Because if we take care of each other, if we take care of our own, we will have more than enough to go around. And so we need to have the conversation, but we also need to try and look at, in that conversation, housing differently and what housing means to individuals.
Now, I'm just gonna, can I just?
Yes.
Okay.
Because she created a conversation, and she's a realtor, so I gotta just go there, so bear with me for just a second. Now, this is economic, okay? Supply and demand, okay? Now, you both are realtors, and so you know this statistic. I believe it's by the year 2032, over 50% of the state's population is going to live where? In the 13 county metro area, right? Basic supply and demand, which means that there's going to be more people looking for housing than there are housing units. Am I wrong? You're a broker, so you tell me.
You're not wrong, but that is a tactic. That is a tactic that is used to promote more high-density development. Will we need it? Yes. But the way that it's being rolled out is more of a scare tactic that says, oh my gosh, we gotta get this done. We gotta get this done now because we're gonna be overpopulated and we're not gonna know what to do. So then now you're building more housing. You're building a lot of apartments and condos, which people living on top of each other. So there's gonna be another impact from that. So yes, it's true. However, I believe that the approach that we are taking as a society needs to be drawn back and re-looked at,
And
because
so-
we're
Okay, hold
pushing
on.
that development.
Well, this question, I see we could go on and on with this one, but we're gonna keep it moving. Yeah. But they exhausted that question. No, so what exhausted? Okay, approximately 48% of people who are incarcerated are black. But what is a growing percentage of that number is black women. Can the panel please talk about the devastating impact on our community when, black women, as well as black men, but black women are denied housing because they have a felony. Many of them have families.
I think, and this goes for men or women, because I think it takes both of those in a household, especially where there are children, because we're talking about the black family. And that happens inside the house, right? So you need the house in order to house a black family. But from there, we're talking about every other thing. We're talking about education, we're talking about health, what your stress looks like. We're talking about overall how long you're gonna live just based upon what your conditions are right there. So when we're talking about being denied access to housing to a man or a woman, that trickles down to the child. And what does that look like as a child? So yes, we can go through these things as adults, where we're trying to figure out what we gotta do. We gotta show up over here to meet with our worker. We gotta show up over here to get this resource. But what does that look like for our babies? And how much are they able to comprehend while they're going through that? And what does that look like as it's internalized and that kind of trauma? And what does that look like as they grow up? And how does that come out in future generations? And so this is how we get this ongoing cycle of where we're at now, because this housing crisis is not new. There's always been the denial of access to housing, particularly for black communities, what we're talking about here. Way back in the day, we're still seeing the effects of those from redlining and from blockbusting and all of those things. So we're really interrupting cycles and generations, and overall what the health of our community looks like, because we all are connected with one another. So it doesn't just affect us, it affects those around us as well. So I think it's a really big question.
So like I said, my parents are incarcerated, parents being both male, father and mother. So first of all, what we have to address is why the black women are being locked up. They're being locked up to get to the men or to get to who they know. And that was something that I had conversation with my mother about when she came across who was actually in the prison and why they were there. It's a tactic used to get to other loved ones or people in their life. And if they don't know anything or if they don't talk, they get locked up. It's also a tactic that is used to break up the black family. It's on purpose. It's completely on purpose. But when that happens, black women really are the pillars of the community. Like, honestly. And it's not to shade anybody, but black women are really the pillars of the community. And so, when you lock up the black woman, literally everybody goes awry. That woman, no matter her age, could have been helping her mother, siblings, children, and the loved one, father of her children or whatnot. You literally just tore everything apart. And so when they re-enter, not only are they trying to enter into society and continue that role, but what you didn't touch on is the fact that not only just with housing, but they gotta fight to get their kids back. Where are the children? So you said black women, but I'm talking about black mothers. Where are the children during this whole time, and what's happening with the children as that gets into the foster care system? When my parents went away, I did end up in an orphanage. I did. I was in another state and situation that it may be, but I ended up in an orphanage for a time being. And my parents had 3 children. And so re-entering, they had to not come back to Minnesota because Minnesota can trace your background as far as it wants to go. Other states only go back 7 or 10 years. Why are we doing that?
Good question.
So you just have to look at everything, like Danielle said, that it impacts so much, but you have women that are coming back when they finally can come back after being locked up for whatever reason, usually nonviolent crimes. That's another thing. When people just look at, oh, you're re-entering, it's like you want to paint everybody with this broad brush that they're violent. A lot of people are getting locked up for nonviolent crimes. We're over here talking about legalizing marijuana. We finna let everybody out?
Right.
And expunge your records? Because there's a lot of people that are entering from the war on drugs that we know what that was all about, and now what's gonna happen to them. And so you have to look at, first of all, why are they being locked up? Second of all, the systems that they have to navigate and the hoops they have to jump through to have a job, to have a house, to have housing over their head, to have education lined up, to be able to live in an area that the municipality says they can live in based on them being re-entering, and then having to do all of that and navigate the foster care system or the human services system to get their children back.
Did you want to say something?
Yeah, I was gonna say something.
Okay, sorry.
To that question. I would be remiss in my black manness if I didn't say something. So, you know, one of my greatest teachers once said that no nation can rise higher than the level of its women. And part of the reason why he said that is the woman is the first teacher of the child and the first person who the child falls in love with. And so they learn love there. And, you know, because we know that it really doesn't even take long to destabilize a family when the matriarch or when the mother or when the woman in that family is taken out. You know, even if you look at how ACLU is going after disrupting cash bail, one of the people who we lift up the most as an example as to why this is so critical is a sister from, I think, Ohio. She, you know, we created a video about, I think she was locked up on a very minimal amount of cash bail, but the domino effect that occurred within her family in that short period of time was really devastating. And you know, we recognize that it's almost like a prime objective for us to disrupt the cash bail system because of the disparate impacts that it's specifically having on Black women. And what we see is the overall destabilization, you know, of our families in general when the queens, so to speak, are under attack. And so it's critical for us to make sure that we recognize that and that, you know, we continue to you know, fight for policies to disrupt that. One of the primary policies is disrupting cash bail, and then it's also looking at the overcriminalization of the Black woman, because again, we know that no nation can rise higher than the level of its women. And so if you know, the stability of our women are disrupted, then the stability of our families are going to be disrupted, then the stability of our entire community is going to be disrupted. And so just at the most base and elemental level, that's a primary objective, is for us to make sure that we put some protections there.
What do we have to do from a community standpoint and a policy or legislative standpoint to start to address this problem?
I think that you brought up a good point here, brother, about building relationships. I was doing some work right over here at North Point trying to help people, and it wasn't necessarily a criminal, and that, Erica, and this is how we first were working together. It's not necessarily just re-entering, but whatever type of barriers it may be of trying to find housing for people.
Having a UD.
Yeah, such as having a UD or having a low credit or anything like that. But to build relationships between landlords and tenants, because there is a very much us versus them mindset that happens there. And so to have somebody facilitate that relationship, and I think that as cities and government, because we've kind of created this monster, right, with like how we develop and what we allow to happen, I think that it's really important that the cities kind of step in and say, okay, we're gonna be responsible for facilitating these relationships and identifying what, end of the day, all landlords are not just like, well, I don't care about you, can't live here, but it is a business and it is an investment. And so they want an incentive, and I think offering an incentive, and as a city coming up with those monies or whatever to implement those incentives to say, okay, if you're gonna have housing that looks like this, you're gonna rent to these people, we'll cut you a break, because it's hard to build trust and it's hard to establish relationships, especially when you're somebody who's been traumatized or used to the system working against you, or sometimes you're a landlord who's been burned multiple times by somebody moving in, right? Those are two truths that are both equally true, that deserve recognition, and owning that, and then saying, okay, well, let's try to really establish something here, but cities taking responsibility for this kind of mess that we've created.
And so, let me just jump in. I don't want to get too far away from. I don't want to get too far away from the idea of the cities taking the lead. I would say that cities and government in general should be at the table. But I think community, I think we are the ones that need to take the lead. This is why we organize this gathering right here. In fact, there are landlords out in the audience, or even some landlords who don't rent to people with impacted backgrounds. There's developers in the audience, and there's also investors out in the audience right now. And I think that it's critical for community, for us to be the ones to convene these tables, and for us to get government at the table, for us to get landlords at the table, and for us to get renters at the table, and then for us to move towards policy development and also relationship building. I really love that idea of relationship building and having conversations and basically humanizing people, because it's that us versus them mentality that we're typically seeing. And like you said, policies and ordinances are being created that help to facilitate this us versus them. I think that it will become more humanizing if we're around the tables having discussions, not in a perspective of it's big I and little you, but we're at the table, we're having discussion, we're all equal, and we want to get to a better point of understanding, and then moving towards policy development.
So I work for the city of Minneapolis, so wait a minute. So working for the city of Minneapolis, first of all, we have to define community. Are you talking about the Black community? Are you talking about faith community? What are you talking about? Because I will say this, working for local government, I come from the standpoint, we are government. I know there are disenfranchised, marginalized communities, which I am a part of, that do not believe that, have been kept out and whatnot, but actually we are government. So when you say community and then you say policy, bring it together. As a community, as the Black community, as the community in Minneapolis and North Minneapolis, you elected these people to represent you. You have the power to go to them, to call them up, to meet them in their office and say, this is not working for me and I want to see a policy, a resolution, and action. Don't just put something on the books and then say it's on the books if ain't nobody rolling nothing out. I want to see it happen to benefit me, your constituent who put you in this office. We are government. And so that's the first thing that we have to empower us. So as a community, we need to work together as a community and empower us and understand that in our collective power, we can call those shots. We also call those shots when we go to vote. Number two, the policies. There are some policies that the city of Minneapolis are working on and working towards. Like I said, there's still an intersection between property rights and government. But there are conveners that are convening tables of landlords, looking for landlords to participate, especially in North Minneapolis, to say, hey, we need you. Everything's not on the renters. Every landlord's not a good landlord. So Everything's not on the renter saying, oh, well, you need to conform to this, whether you have a criminal background or not. So some of these things are on the landlords, and I know, Richard, you've been waiting patiently.
Let's get it in.
Taking notes.
Yep. All right, Richard.
Go ahead.
What?
Go ahead, Earl. No, go ahead. I love hearing
You know,
y'all.
2 minutes, Earl.
Okay, real quick. All that is, in a perfect world, in a perfect system, these things would be ideal, okay? It's not a perfect system, it's not a perfect world. The other thing we have to understand is the role of government. Government is not designed to take care of people. That's not the role of government, okay? And if I'm a property owner and you set a policy that tells me I have to do something, I'm going to feel that you trampled on my rights as a business. And then that's going to create a rift between me and the person that you're trying to serve. That is not how this thing is going to evolve. We've tried that. I sat on the Landlord Association for South Minneapolis for 7 years. And I went to meetings and I listened to business owners, property owners, commercial business owners, and they had the same gripe. The city is trying to tell me what I can do with my property, and I paid a lot of money for it. Okay? So that's not, we have to create synergy.
Okay.
This has to be where everybody feels like they are winning something.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
I would challenge that.
Can we get just Richard in? I want to hear what he has to say.
No. So what it is, I feel this is a passionate conversation, and I appreciate the desire to talk about this, but I feel like we're talking about this from strictly a professional or practitioner standpoint. I mean, not once have we really talked about the motivation of the tenant and getting them in. I mean, it's good to talk about it from way up here, but we got to bring it way, way, way down, because when everyone leaves here, there's still going to be a bunch of homeless people out there with no clue how to get a place. All right, so I want to let people get in, but a lot of the work I do is consulting. That's why I started McLemore Holdings, because I have folks like the city of Minneapolis, the city of St. Paul, and I didn't know that Hennepin County and Ramsey County are two totally different things that you got to get plugged in. But anyway, so I have these different county and these city agencies calling on me as a consultant, and we do these think tanks. I sit there for 4 or 5 hours and we have these conversations. And it becomes my job just to constantly bring it back in. Okay, we can talk about occupancy license breaks. We can talk about less inspections if you rent to people. We can talk about a universal leash. We can throw ideas out for days and days and weeks and weeks and weeks, but people are still homeless. So at the end of the day, when we're done talking about it, the one thing we need to talk about is the motivation of the landlord. And most of these landlords don't even live in this state. So it's really hard to have a conversation with some folks that live in Florida or California, because that's where the money's at. That's who owns these properties. Mostly, if you really trace back, this ain't homegrown. I appreciate the folks in the audience, don't get me wrong, but this isn't a homegrown problem. This is a huge problem that's not going to be solved tonight. So my takeaway from here is, how do you help people today? How do you help some folks that just walk through the door and says, man, I need some help? You know what I mean? I get it. Yes, we have to sit at the table, but I guess I really want to talk about what's going to happen, like on the ground level. How do we help some folks? And I feel like that is education.
So let's just spend a few minutes talking about that.
Yeah.
Okay. How can we help people today?
I really appreciate that. Thank you for bringing us back, because that's real. We could be here all day.
Right.
And education, I think, is right. One of the things, understanding a lease and how that works, because as a property owner, yes, you have rights, and as a tenant, you have rights as well. And so when you agree in a contract, which is what a lease is, it's not unilateral, it's bilateral. So that means that there are agreements on both sides. And understanding as a tenant that you have rights and that you have it written out for a way, and being able to read and understand what you're signing in a lease is a way that someone could help themselves right now to protect themselves from some bull that might come their way.
So I totally agree, education is needed in one of the ways. However, if somebody is here right now and they are walking out the door, education is not gonna help them when they're looking for a place over their head tonight. What would help them is if there are landlords or people that are willing to look at their properties differently. And by that, I mean, I just came from a Empowering Inclusion Summit today, and Devin George was talking about a pastor that bought a 5 or 8-plex building, excuse me. And he had units for housing, units for therapy, units for food shelf. That's what'll help people right now today, is that if we start looking at how we're buying up property or the property that we currently have, or working with community or working with partners to partner up with people and provide that housing. That's what would help people today.
All right. Well, I want to thank the panel. Please join me at giving them a hand of applause. And what I'd like to do now is open it up for questions and answers and solutions. I'll start here.
Okay.
2 minutes.
My name is Beth, and it's somebody in the community and somebody who's also been to jail. One thing I have is a suggestion. What about partnering up with some disabled people and sharing housing? That's one thing. That's one thing I think about. One of the things that we say in the disabled community is the people who often need the policies are the policymakers. The other thing is my grandfather started Amicus, which one of the things people in jail or prison need a job. And they used to help people get jobs, but I don't know if they work. Maybe we could do some skill shares over at the Urban League and have people sharing some education of whatever they have. And partnering with some different agencies. I think also talking to synagogues and some other places might be willing to help people if they knew what they needed.
There you go. Mike, anybody want to speak to that?
I think that's a good idea. Again, it comes down to relationships. And then also I think it comes down to being organized, right, as communities. And if we have two separate groups of people who are fighting for 2 different issues, but they agree to fight with each other on those issues, it just adds more impact to that fight. So I think that that's a great idea.
Very good.
I also think it's a great idea, but as far as people living together that are unrelated, I think it comes down to policy again, because the city of Minneapolis does not allow so many unrelated people to live in the same property, and that's a policy that needs to change. Why are we policing that?
Yeah.
So, it's a both and.
That sounds like a slavery code.
Hi, my name is Matthew. So I have a question. Talk a lot about tenants' rights. What are some rights that tenants have that have backgrounds? When they're looking for housing, what can they do to negotiate for their lease or prices or location? Like, what rights do they actually have in buying housing?
Can I jump on that? Because, that's really what I do. I provide education on housing, You have a ton of rights, A lot of folks don't know, for just a quick example, is that if you get denied housing, and you have a criminal background, you make the assumption that that's why you got denied, and you don't request a reason. You have time to actually, in writing, submit it to that property management company or that landlord, and legally they have to tell you why they denied you, which gives you a track record, especially to say you have a UD or something like that. Now you're showing hardship, so then you can go to that judge and say, hey man, I gotta get this off my record. They won't rent to me, I'm showing you. So there's things you can do, but if you don't know, brother, I appreciate that question. If you don't know, you just walk around here wondering and assuming that it's your background. It could have been your credit score, it could have been accumulation things, it could have been how you look, it could have been a lot of different things, but you really, really don't know unless you ask that question.
You also have, just want to throw out there real quick, Midwest Legal Aid has a lot of information about your rights as a tenant, as a renter, but our Attorney General's office has always had this, and it's the Tenant Rights Handbook that is free. You can go online and be like, I want 50 of those delivered to my house, and they'll deliver them. It's a free book. They have the seller's handbook, the buyer's handbook. They got things about buying a car. And they have the tenant's right, landlord-tenant's rights. And I suggest everybody get a copy of that because there's a lot that people don't know.
Yes, listening to the panel, I got two bones. First bone is, majority of the landlords here got their property, their land rent, given to them by the government. So let's be real. It's nothing that they worked for, it's something they were given. The second issue I have is a community, I'm talking about the Black community, because we asked about the parents and the whole nine. The problem is we don't have a game plan for our people. It's our responsibility to take care of our own. We have yet to say collectively, we haven't taken that responsibility. We have to buy up property in our communities to rent to our people. It doesn't matter about the credit scores. It doesn't matter about the education. This state has some of the largest disparities based off of education when it comes to people of color. So we keep talking about playing a rigged game, and we keep telling the contestants, well, if you just played it right, you can't play it right because it's rigged to begin with. So until we start talking about how we're going to control and become the captains of our own destinies, we're going to keep having this conversation.
So thank you, brother, for bringing that up. Number one, how my family was able to survive off of after reentry was buying a property. We had this whole conversation, just kind of assumed everybody would be renting. They ain't looking at your criminal background when you go to buy something.
Say that.
So if you want to get together with some people or have investors or do what you need to do, you can go buy you a property. Shameless plug for the city of Minneapolis. We do have vacant lots for sale to build your own home. Why not? If you want to build your own home, then you got $20,000 that you can use towards that to own or occupy that property. If you want to build the housing for other reasons, you may not get the $20,000 grant, but you know we got over 400 vacant lots. I'm gonna need y'all to go to minneapolishomes.org, look at our lots, look at the prices, and say, hey, I can do what this brother just said. I can get some people together as a community, buy some property, build some housing, and guess what? I can be a landlord and put whoever in it I want to put in it.
That's a good point. Also collectively purchasing things together. So maybe that's not something that you can up and do right now, but maybe it's something you can do between 5 people who have the same mindset as you and start doing things. Cooperatively.
Yeah, I didn't even like consider the whole notion of purchasing a home, until I was having a discussion with Nika Bowie, and I was just looking and frustrated because of, this whole renting thing and how, difficult it was for me to find housing. And then, she, kind of opened up my thinking in terms of, you're going to be paying the same amount anyway. Why don't you consider, buying a home? And I was like, well, why don't I consider buying a home? And then like my entire thinking kind of switched up, and now I'm still in the process of buying a home. I might actually end up purchasing the home of someone who was formerly an associate warden. She and I are in discussions right now, as strange as that may seem, for me to end up purchasing her home.
That's ideal, to get your own home. But a lot of times when people come home from prison on day one, they're not ready for that.
No.
And this is really one of the main reasons why we're having this discussion, right? Because people come home and they need a place to stay, right? And so it's the apartment buildings that stands in the way of that. Now, we all know ultimately we want to be homeowners, but right now we need a place to stay, right?
Right.
Let me get you.
I'll say this. I think that we shouldn't limit what we dream about, number one. Number two, I think the way this conversation just began to open up after Brother Thomas's comment is something we need to explore, because ownership leads to stability, right? When we talk about the wealth gap that exists currently between our white and black counterparts, we're 228 years behind our white counterparts. Ownership has to be a part of the equation. It doesn't mean that we need to put it on the people who are just released to go buy a building. But if we're all sitting in this room right now, there should be at least 3 of us that can come together and say, we're gonna get a building and we are gonna house people in this 12 units that we can afford to put together. That's something that can happen tonight. And so my challenge to everybody in this room, don't just leave here tonight with saying good points and all these people are up here connected and plugged. She just said the city of Minneapolis has lots.
What's the website again?
We should leave here tonight with at least a few people connected with some of the people who are affected, sitting here right now who can speak for themselves and figuring out how to create new spaces that they can actually have control over, that lead to ownership, that lead to stability.
What's the website again?
MinneapolisHomes.org.
Hi, that was my sad little story that Willie was telling you guys, but the other part to that story is when I was trying to find housing once I got put out of my place, I encountered one of the slickest hustles because, I spent about $500 with these rental application fees. I went over to this place over here, my gut told me not to do it. It was 2 people in front of me, but I was desperate. So my gut told me, don't give this guy your money. So he collected like $130. So when he turned me down a couple of days later, I said, you ain't really got to rent this place out. I mean, because you collected all this money, no wear and tear on your apartment. So I happened to go all through North Minneapolis. And it's like Richard was saying, this housing thing is contrived because I see too many vacant houses around here. And so the thing about it is I am closing on a house shortly. The twist to this is that I'm only gonna rent the felons. So that's gonna be the twist of the whole thing.
I have to say that it is a statewide issue, but it's a national issue. And we do, I'm gonna bring it back to policy. We do need to push policy at the state level for things such as landlords collecting fee after fee after fee, knowing that they're not gonna rent the property. Also, it actually is a law that they're not supposed to collect rental fees when they have an application that they're already looking at. But how would you know that, right? You don't know. If they tell you they don't have application, how would you know? So again, Midwest Legal Aid is a great resource. They are funded through different entities that they can help you. You don't have to be in a legal situation to call them up and get some advice. Congratulations on closing on a property, because I didn't say it, but I like that, like you said, Richard, you now are owning property and you're seeing it with more than one lens. You now will own property and be able to rent that property out, and you see it with more than one lens.
I've rented and I've also owned my own home, and I've known my share of landlords, and I guess I just don't trust them to solve this problem. Especially now, as hot as the market is, and I don't know if it's in the hands of the landlords if this would get solved. How close are we to getting, for instance, incentives, like through property tax relief for income producing properties, and really holding legislators' feet to the fire on this and saying we need some help? Is there anything possible that way? I know that whole thing takes time, but I just feel like that's the only level where there's going to be some incentive for a landlord, who's going to get some kind of a payoff at the end of the day to get some subsidy to rent to people with low credit scores, and I was in that situation for quite a while and had trouble finding a place to live, or a criminal background. Are we close to getting the legislators involved, and would it affect them negatively to back a bill like this?
So, a few things. One, at the city level, there are incentives in place for renting affordable housing. So that's 60% area median income or below. There's incentives in place with that with the 4D. Pilot 4D is a property tax classification for a certain size property that is a rental. But it's called the 4D pilot. There's the NOAA. NOAA stands for Naturally Occurring Affordable Housing. That's essentially saying older buildings that you don't take and fix up and then up the rent. There's incentives for that. So there are incentives in place for that. Like I said earlier, your criminal background is not a protected class. And so when you start talking about the legislators looking at that, whether at the local level or at the state level, I'm gonna tell you right now, the realtors are coming down on that.
Yeah.
There's no way the realtor party will let that fly. And the realtors do have a party. And it's a pretty powerful party. I'm actually on it, but
You mean lobbyists?
yeah, it's called RPAC.
Yep.
Realtors are calling a lot of shots. The one thing that you run into, because I wanted to say to you, is that you were talking as landlords need to be at the table. The biggest issue is that the way that this country, the way that this system is set up, you are a landlord. That term is not by accident. You have all the power. You have all the say-so as a property owner. So when we start to say things and we want to do this, if it affects taxes or anything, the realtors are coming out because they're protecting property owners. And property owners, mind you, black folks, we used to be property. That is how this system is set up over here. So when you start talking about impeding upon those rights and what they view those rights are and not looking at housing as a human right, that's when you're going to start to run into barriers, I should say. But as far as the legislator incentivizing individuals for renting to people with criminal backgrounds, that would be something that I say would have to start at the grassroots level, the community level, be a municipal ordinance or resolution that can be kind of practiced and then go beyond that.
That's, hold on for a second. I think that's why earlier I asked the question, why should I care? Because I could be black, and like the brother was saying, right, I can own 5 or 6 houses, but it don't matter if I got a racist mind and I'm practicing discrimination against my own, right? So I just think, that that's really important that, if we are black and we own property, that we get over whatever, phobia or fear, and we got about uplifting each other.
I wanted to, there's a federal tax credit available to employers when they hire a person from various classifications. And one of those classifications is a person who has a conviction in their background. There's also a federal bond that is put in place for the first 6 months of a person's employment. Okay? Now, creatively, there could be a conversation about something similar to that incentivizes a landlord to rent to a person who has a conviction to where it's a win-win situation. Okay? This is what I believe the issue is there has been this contentious relationship that has evolved to the point to where now people who are coming out of incarceration are being deprived of opportunities to have adequate housing simply because they're people coming out of incarceration.
Danielle alluded to tax incentives and things of that nature. Yeah, she talked about it.
One thing I was gonna say, another thing for getting money would be land trust. That would be another opportunity for him to get together with people and get a house and get the land. And the other thing is, what about making your building Section 8? So other low-income people could help these people.
Well, the rents in the cities are so high now that most landlords don't accept Section 8.
Well,
Because they're getting the market rent, which is actually above what Section 8 pays.
Yeah.
And Section 8 is hard to deal with. Landlords don't want to deal with Section 8, you know? And there is some stuff that's happening, to the point that you were just making, and it just escaped me.
Land trust.
Land trust, yes. Lots of talks about land trust, lots of talk about cooperatives. So that's something that's happening on the ground right now. And I think like the elephant in the room again is like racism and white supremacy, capitalism. These things exist in our society. These are things that are very difficult for people to talk about and to name, especially when someone feels like you're attacking them. You know, but that has a lot to do with what we're seeing, and it's important that we always bring that back to the center of conversation, because sometimes that's just the brick wall that you run into.
Yeah, I wanted to say, I'm a impacted person, returning person, all of that. But there is a resource available, and I haven't utilized it. I've been looking for housing myself, and housinglink.org has a program that's called Beyond Backgrounds. And I don't know how widely that's used or how many, it doesn't seem like a whole lot of people know about it. Like I had to discover it, digging around on the website. But that might be an option for some people to utilize a resource maybe.
Yep, Housing Link is a good resource with Midwest Legal Aid. I do want to say, I don't know where this bill is at right now, Danielle, but the bill that is going through the Minnesota legislature that includes, it includes a lot around housing. One of the things is around evictions, but one of the things that it has is ban the box on rental applications.
Yep.
We should be following that bill. We should be contacting our legislators and our senators and our House of Representatives and finding out where that bill is and how they're voting on that bill. Because banning the box on a rental application could be huge right now.
I think that passed at the House. I think that it's still a fight. I don't even know if they heard that at the Senate. So again, it's like another layer where I feel like it's so hard to pull people into politics.
And education.
And education on how it even works or what the process is when you're dealing with the struggle of being homeless right now in the moment.
Yeah.
But who you elect into office really does make a difference, because they are the people who are making decisions on what your everyday life will look like.
And for the people that are, really looking for housing, and I mean, it doesn't have to be a house, maybe it is a house. Use the resources here, because what I'm hearing a lot is, one side we're saying it's tough, but the other side I'm hearing tons and tons and tons of resources, city, county, and federal, that you can get in some type of housing or a housing program. Use them. Because you're right, it's a national problem, and let's just be honest, it's a lot easier in Minnesota to get housing right now than in other states. So imagine how hard it's going to be in 2 and 3 years, 4 and 5 years. So you better catch up. Like really, if you need these resources, use them right now. Don't sit in this room. And what I'm noticing is me and a couple other people on this panel are the only one taking notes. So if there's tons of resources here and you need help, or if you're a service provider or you're here for some other reason, you should be writing this stuff down, not complaining about needing help.
Yeah, I most definitely got me some notes. I would say one of the other things that, I would love to see implemented more, and, perhaps even more outreach from the Department of Corrections. I think that they might be moving in the right direction now, but I think I would like to see an intensification of it. Completely revamping, completely revising, maybe even just tearing up and throwing out the housing resource list that's utilized now. I called nearly every last single number on the list. And, many of the landlords that were on the list, this is about 2 years ago, many of the landlords that were on the list were typically upset that I was calling. Many of them yelled at me and told me to tell them to take their names off the list, as though like I would have known, how upset they were going to be, by being, part of this. And, I have prepared myself really well to get out. I got a college degree. I was the first person to become A+ certified. That is a legitimate certification as a computer repair specialist. Like I took the test and passed the test. I was the first one in the history of the DLC to do that. I had, a job already lined up before I got out. Like, I had a lot of ducks in a row, and so I thought that the housing piece was going to be a much easier piece. And quite frankly, I wasn't prepared for the voracious response that came back at me, when it was call after call after call after call and denial after denial. Like, it just blew me away and kind of put me into like a depressive state. After 2 consistent days of that, I just had to take a break. I was fortunate that we were able to find a family member who was, able to rent to me, because just utilizing the resource list, it just was like total, complete, abject denial across the board. There was no entry point. There was no relief. It was very depressing. And I had a lot of resources and a lot of things lined up. So that's one of the things that I would like to see, is a complete overhaul and a very aggressive outreach efforts by the Department of Corrections to actually find landlords who won't be teed off that their names are part of a list, because they would have been like completely vetted out. The last thing that I think that I would like to see is a much more intensive effort before an individual is released to actually, on the front end of this thing, help to secure a housing situation. My address wasn't approved until about 2 weeks before my SRD date. For those of you who don't know what that is, that's your supervised release date. And so 2 weeks before, and it was about 1 month before I was actually getting out that we even began the process. And then 2 weeks out from that is when it was finally approved. God forbid it was denied. Right. That would have left me 2 weeks to scramble to find a place that would have been approved for me to get released into. And so that release planning must begin like way earlier in someone's reentry process, and it needs to be much more aggressive with regard to actually locating housing before a person gets out, so that we're not, in a mad dash, or grateful that we were able to rent a room, but in a much more stabilized situation. And so those are the 2 key things that I would want to say I know we got Commissioner Snell here, for instance, over the Department of Corrections, that I would want to say into the officials who are in here right now. Those are 2 real critical things that need to happen pretty immediately.
Yeah, I was just curious to know if there's some kind of clearinghouse or something. I know myself, I rent rooms, and also I've devised other creative solutions to kind of, keep some housing affordable. I have a very large home. I have a small network of friends who are empty nesters, who also have rented rooms and have kept prices affordable, but it's kind of been hit or miss, kind of word of mouth. And so I don't know if there's like some kind of structured clearinghouse where we could like put our names on a list and say, we'd be open to renting to brothers and sisters who, need something, but it's nothing that's like large scale or anything like that. So if anybody's interested, you can talk to me afterwards. But I just want to know if there's something that's organized or set up that, I can refer people to and say, hey, go to this agency, they can do some alignment for you. And that's just a small way, but maybe something like this could be systematized. I don't know.
Yes, thank you, Veronica. I think creative solutions is the way to go. There's an organization, Community Stabilization Project, that's in Frogtown, and they have started an initiative where they are working as the facilitators of relationships with landlords. So people who are coming into Frogtown, who are purchasing property, and they get some sort of incentive with like being able to make their energy more efficient and going green, and using grants and resources so that they get that investment in their property. And along with that, they agree to work with CSP to help house people, and relationship between the landlord and the tenant stays healthy. So I think that it's on the rise. The internet is a powerful tool, but I think that, like, you know, to Eli's point earlier, it's up to communities to get organized about doing those things. We have the power, we have the knowledge and the skill set to do those things, and we have the networks to do those things. So I think we just have to be intentional about what we want to see and then take the steps to make it happen.
I also think, real quick, that I don't know that there's actually a clearinghouse right now for that type of service, but it still comes back to municipality where you've had to get creative in your network because there are restrictions at the municipal level for doing such things. And that's another reason for going back to your lawmakers, your policymakers, and saying this restriction needs to be removed. And maybe with that, we also need to start up a clearinghouse that can provide the services to help meet the needs of some of our most vulnerable in our community.
And just for clarity purposes, what's the number of unrelated persons that can be, that can occupy a house?
It depends on the zone, the neighborhood, and the community that the property is in. They go from R1 to R4, and then there's high occupancy. Makes it really tough as somebody that's trying to do sober housing and housing for people with felony convictions. Because it takes months and months and months to get reasonable accommodations and do it properly with all of the inspections, and then we're fitting the bill for a house we had to put 20% down on, and then having to pay the rent while we're getting the reasonable accommodation in place, and by the time we're into it, I mean, we wish we could buy more houses, but we don't have any more 20% down and 20,000 to spend to get it up to what the municipalities call for. It's, they don't make it easy, not in Minneapolis, and it's even harder in St. Paul.
And I want to say in Minneapolis, policymakers have previously said that they would like to raise that to 10, allow 10 unrelated adults to be able to live in the house together.
I knew if I stood, I really was going to happen. So, Paul Schnell, I just want to, first of all, I just want to say thank you to the ACLU and everybody for coming out to talk about this issue. You know, it's super complex, and I just appreciate the fact that there are the big things, the big broad policy stuff, and I think there's the really creative things about how do neighbors just help other people, and I think that's really cool. I also think that as I think about some of that, I take a step back from the issue that we're talking about, and I think one of the incredible opportunities, and I think one of the really nice things about an event like this is the opportunity, and I think for me, being new to the Department of Corrections, and spending as much time as I have in the last 3 months with folks who are incarcerated or formerly incarcerated, and the opportunities, I think, to build and create connections with people to provide higher levels of support, whether that's with formerly incarcerated people, and I think even across race. We live such immensely segregated lives. And I think the opportunity really of creating deeper connections in the long haul is going to serve us all well. And I say that as somebody who has immense privilege, and I think in that role, it is my obligation to help build and create those connections. So I say that because I think in the long haul, the more we can do that, the better off we're going to do around serving folks who are coming back into the community, and even I think making it better for our kids in the future, because we break down some of the segregation that exists in the lives that we oftentimes have. And so I just want to say thank you to people for being here. We're committed to trying to do right by folks in reentry. We have a lot of work to do, we know that. And it's a complex issue, but I think we'll get there, and we'll get there because of things like this. So thank you all.
Can I chime in on what's this? What's your name? Michelle? Veronica.
All right, let's chime in.
Okay,
We wanna
quick.
wrap it up.
All right, Ms. Veronica, as far as clearinghouses go, if you have folks that are have a heart to give back through housing, I would look at working with local agencies who provide some type of housing. Like Ujama Place, one of the things I did for that program is I made it mandatory to go through a 5-week tenant training class that I put on myself before I would refer you on to any type of housing, independent housing. Even though it's a room, it's still independent. They have to know some things to be there with you, correct? Yes, so you want that education behind it. So maybe work with some local agencies, like the one across the street. you know, and let them be your clearinghouse. Let them find tenants for you, because then you know that they're vetted.
We want to thank everybody for coming. We said we was gonna stop at 8. We lied a little bit, 8:01, 8:02, but we pretty close. Tonight was about problems, but it was also about solutions. But we couldn't talk about the solutions unless we talked about the problems, right? So we hope that everyone got a lot from it. It don't stop here. We got a lot of great feedback from the audience. And please, afterwards, please come up here and shake the hands of the folks on the panel. Let's exchange some phone numbers and let's get busy.
So I would say before we break out, there's one final piece to this. This was a discussion in terms of like, what are some of the issues? What are some of the potential solutions? But part of what we also want to do at the ACLU is create a working group with individuals who are part of government, community, property owners. And so we do want to create a working group that will be working towards systemic policy changes. And so if you would like to be part of that working group, please go and talk to Abe Rishby. He's at the end. He's one of our ACLU interns. We're going to lose him in a few weeks. He's been great. We appreciate having him there. But we would certainly love for you all to go and connect with him. And then we'll send information out later. There'll be people representing the city of Minneapolis, city of St. Paul, Hennepin County, Ramsey County, property owners, community members. And then we'll begin convening those spaces and moving towards systemic changes. So go and talk to Abe.
Thank you.